29, Going Home. It turned out that none of us code talkers could go home as soon as the end of the war was announced. There was still work for us to do. 2 Navajo code talkers, Paul Blatchford and Rex Malone, were reassigned to Army and Navy intelligence and shipped out with special teams to Japan to visit Hiroshima and Nagasaki ahead of our troops. They sent their reports back to San Francisco and Navajo Code, where others of us had been sent. I was one of those in San Francisco who received their messages. Those messages shocked me. Paul and Rex were horrified at what they saw when our 2 atomic bombs had fallen. All the buildings were flat and burned. Pitiful, injured survivors were camping out in sheds made from pine trees. Those sheds looked to Paul and Rex just like the lean-tos made back home by our own Navajo people. Many of those Japanese survivors looked so Indian that they might have been Navajos. They said it was hard to look at those people and think of them as enemies. Our leaders all told us that those atomic bombs were needed to end the war. That may have been so, grandchildren. I have no doubt that they made the war shorter. However, receiving those messages made me pray hard that such bombs would never fall on human beings again. A few of our number never left the Marines at all. They decided it would be a good career for them and re-enlisted. Among them were Bill Klein, Bill Price, and Dean Wilson. They became 20-year men. Others joined different branches of the armed forces. Later on in Korea and in Vietnam, Navajos would again use our code to send secret messages in battles. Some code talkers stayed on in the Pacific after they were discharged. They had discovered when they were in New Zealand and in Australia that they were not treated badly because they were Indians, but respected as Americans who fought in the war. They married local girls and just stayed there for the rest of their lives. Most of us, though, eventually got back here to Denita, just as I did when my tour of duty finally ended. Before we left the Marines, each of us was sternly reminded that our code was still a top secret. We could not talk with anyone about it. It was so secret that our real occupational specialty was not even mentioned on our discharge papers. Usually, Marines' discharge papers indicate what he was trained to do. Sometimes those were professions that were needed back home. Having it on your discharge that you had been a mechanic or an electrician or radio operator could help you get a job. There was a special number for each type of work in the United States Marine Corps Manual of Military Occupational Specialties. Our number was 642. 642, code talker. Transmits and receives messages in a restricted language by radio and wire. Sends and receives messages by means of semaphores and other visual signals. May perform field lineman, switchboard operator, or other communication duties. That number, 642, was not on my discharge or on papers of other code talkers. As far as the outside world was concerned, I'd just been an ordinary Marine with no specialty at all. You can't tell anyone about what you really did, Marine, my commanding officer said to me. Then he smiled. It was a grim smile with no humor in it. But you'll probably be hearing from us soon. We may be at war with the Russians in another year or so. You fellows will certainly be needed again then. I prayed it would never be so, and am thankful that war with Russia never came to be. Some of us were not sure what we would do when we got home, and I was one of them. I sat in the bus that went from California to Arizona, just watching the miles go by. It was as if I were in a dream. After all our hardships in the Pacific War, things felt too easy now. Nothing around me seemed real. Then something happened to me that was all too real, and it showed me what I had to do. I'd just gotten off the bus in a little town at the edge of our reservation. I was feeling thirsty, so I went into a bar to get a Coke. I was still wearing my uniform. While I'd been in San Francisco and I wore my uniform in the street, people of all kinds would come up to me and say hello. Some would shake my hand and thank me for fighting for our country. Now that I was almost home, it was different. The bartender, a big guy with a red, sweaty face, glared at me. "Can't you read, you stupid Navajo?" he said, pointing at a sign that hung over the bar. It said, "No Indians served here." 2 other white customers came along the bar, glared at me as I read the sign aloud. "I don't want an Indian," I said. "I'm just thirsty, Marine who wants a Coke." They didn't laugh at my joke. The bartender and the 2 other white men just grabbed me and threw me out into the street. I did not try to fight them. Even though I was small, I was strong, and I had been trained as a Marine. I could have given them a real fight, but I understood it would not accomplish anything. I walked away, having realized something. Although I had changed, the things that had made me feel sad and ashamed when I was a child in boarding school had stayed the same. It didn't matter that I had fought for America. It didn't matter that I had made white friends who would have sacrificed their lives to save me when we were at war. In the eyes of these prejudiced people in that bar, I was just another stupid Navajo. But I did not walk away thinking that things were hopeless. I did not try to find a bar that would sell an Indian liquor so that I could lose my sorrows by drinking. I'd learned to be self-confident as a Marine, to believe that I could succeed even in the hardest battle. Now I had another battle ahead of me, one that could be fought in another way. I could go back and finish my last year of high school. I could take advantage of that GI Bill the other Marines had spoken about. I could go on to college and become a teacher. I could learn how to teach our language to our children. I could also learn more about history so that I could understand things and help our children to understand by reminding them to never forget our language and our culture. And that is what I did. It was not easy, and I did not do it quickly. For one thing, I still had to be healed. Those of us who came back to Denatah from the war were all wounded, not just in our bodies, but in our minds and our spirits. You know what our Navajo way is, to be quiet and modest. So when we Navajo soldiers came back, there were no big parties or big parades for us as there were for the other GIs in their hometowns. We Navajos were just expected to fit back in. I began to have awful nightmares. I woke up from seeing men die and hearing the sounds of their cries. Exploding shells burst in my dreams as wave after wave of screaming enemy soldiers came at me. But although I had no victory parades, I had something else. I had my family and our traditional ceremonies. I had the holy people to help me. Finally, when it seemed I was about to go crazy, my family insisted that I have an enemy way. My old friend, Hosty Mitchell, made all the arrangements, and the ceremony was done for me. It brought me back into balance. I know just the moment when that happened. It was during the first night of my enemy way, when everything was quiet. As I was sitting and waiting for the next part of the ceremony to begin, I closed my eyes and I was back on Bougainville. It was night on the island. We were surrounded by the enemy. Smitty was sound asleep beside me. Then I heard singing in Navajo. Was I awake or dreaming? I floated out of my foxhole right into the jungle. The moonlight was bright, and everything around me that had seemed strange and threatening was now beautiful. Every leaf, every flower, every small creature that crawled or flew was beautiful. Even the leeches and mosquitoes that wanted to suck my blood, even the land crabs whose shells sparkled like turquoise in the moonlight, no longer seemed alien to me. Everything was just the way it should be, and all was in perfect balance. Then someone was shaking my shoulder. I was back in the foxhole. It was morning. Smitty was telling me the Japanese were gone. They had pulled back. We were safe. I closed my eyes in relief and heard that singing voice in Navajo again. This time when I opened my eyes, I was home, truly home. Big Schoolboy was shaking his rattle, and I was at peace. My balance had been restored. I could go forward on a path of beauty. Through all the years, we kept our secret about having been code talkers. I worked hard for our people as a teacher and a member of our community. All around me, I saw other code talkers doing the same, each in his own way. Some went to colleges and universities and training schools. Some became engineers or business owners or artists. It was not easy. In some ways, that GI Bill was not fair to us Navajos. Other ex-servicemen could use it to help them build or buy their own homes, but not us. Smitty and Georgia Boy both sent me photos of their new homes. I wrote back and congratulated them without telling them that I could never do what they had done. It didn't work that way for Indians. Because the houses we wanted to build would be on Indian reservations, we were refused help. We could only build or buy a home outside of our sacred homeland. Just like many other things in the white man's world, that housing rule was unfair to Indians. However, I never gave up. I just became more determined. I took part in tribal government, working for education reform on a reservation. Although I did not accomplish as much as I had hoped, I am proud of the things that I did over the years. Finally, in 1969, we were told that we could speak without being code talkers. We could speak about being code talkers. New computers were more efficient than people in sending and receiving code. Our story was declassified. We formed a Code Talkers Association and began having meetings. Books were written about us, and we were invited to speak at special events. We were invited to the White House by one president after another. We were given medals like this one. All of that was good, grandchildren, but more important than any praise was the fact that we could now tell the story. We could tell our children and our grandchildren about the way our sacred language helped this country. So, my grandchildren, that is the tale this medal has helped me to tell. It is not just my story, but a story of our people and of the strength that we gain from holding onto our language from being dying. I pray that none of you will ever have to go into battle as I did. I also pray that you will fight to keep our language, to hold on to it with the same warrior spirit that our Indian people showed in that war. Let our language keep you strong, and you will never forget what it is to be Navajo. You will never forget what it means to walk in beauty.